Hello and welcome everyone. I can see participants joining in. So I'm just going to give everyone a minute to join. But thank you so much for joining this webinar on sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse. We have a Q&A box where if you have any questions or contributions or feedback you want to give, please feel free to pop that in there. And we know that everyone who's joining is either an expert in the subject matter or very interested in it, but everyone definitely has an opinion. So we would love to hear your opinions. I believe we can start. I am Amanda Manyame, and I am the Digital Law and Rights Advisor at Equality Now. And I am happy to welcome everybody here today for this webinar on sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse, which is brought to you by the Alliance for Universal Digital Rights, AUDRi, Vulnera, and Equality Now. Every day we hear about new and amazing ways technology is used to advance everyone's rights, but we're also hearing more and more about the ways that tech is used and the internet is used to harm people and women in particular. This increase in technology-facilitated harms has started to increase over the years, especially as tech companies have raced to develop technologies that are easily accessible, easy to incorporate into our lives, into our everyday lives, and blur the lines between our physical and digital worlds. The metaverse is one such technology where we have seen it evolve from being sci-fi-like. It was a technology that was mostly used in gaming, but it has started to be used in everyday life, such as on-the-job training, in the education sector, by companies that have remote workers. And we're also seeing a number of governments starting to invest in the development of different metaverses, metavi, not sure what the plural is. But there's a lot of work to try get one consolidated metaverse, essentially one digital world where we are all able to connect in what feels almost like the physical world. Unfortunately, though, the metaverse, like other technologies, has become sites of new forms of sexual violence, with female presenting avatars far more likely to experience multiple forms of abuse, from simulated groping and harassment to virtual rape. Every other day, you see media outlets such as the Washington Post, The Guardian, Forbes, posting articles with headlines such as "Attacks in the metaverse are booming, police are starting to pay attention." We read of victims of sexual violence in the metaverse, detailing how the groping and rape felt real and their physical bodies were responding to attacks. This is because the metaverse is designed to deliver an immersive, real-like experience so that your experience is akin to having experienced whatever it was in the physical world. But what legal remedies would a victim have if they are harmed in the metaverse? Are they legal remedies to begin with? Some have said that people are killed in games all the time, but we don't call that murder. Yet being sexually violated in the metaverse or anywhere else online, especially for women, is just as traumatizing as being sexually violated in the physical world. And like I already said, it feels as though it is happening to you in the physical world. This is also because women are sexually violated every day, all the time in the physical world. So it is very triggering. In a report which was co-produced by AUDRi, Equality Now, and Vulnera, the effects of this new form of technology-facilitated abuse in the metaverse is explored. The authors, Dr. Carlotta and Dr. Gianclaudio, who we have here today, explore the potential for applying and adapting existing laws to the metaverse scenarios. Today, they'll talk to us about the research they conducted and discuss possible responses to sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse. As you listen in, please do post any of your questions that you have in the Q&A. Also, give us any comments or thoughts that you might be having as our presenters address you today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gianclaudio, who is an associate professor of law and technology at Leiden University and a board member at eLaw, which is the Center for Law and Digital Technologies. He is also the co-director of the Brussels Privacy Hub, Free University of Brussels, and an associate editor of Computer Law and Security Review. He has authored a number of publications on different topics, and he's also the founder of Vulnera, which is the International Observatory of Vulnerability in Data Protection. We also have Carlotta, who is a postdoctoral researcher at eLaw, and where she works at the intersection of law, gender, and technology. Carlotta's publication record includes articles in leading international journals and layperson's magazines. Notable works have been cited by the European Commission for proposal on a directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence, with a special focus on the suggested criminalization of rape and image-based sexual abuse. So we'll definitely be hearing from people that have worked and have studied this topic. So I'd like to pass on to you, Carlotta and Gianclaudio. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for the introduction, and good afternoon or good morning, regardless of where you are, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. It's our great pleasure to continue this research cooperation with AUDRi and Equality Now. So maybe I will rapidly introduce some slides and our work, and then I will pass to my colleague. So maybe a couple of introductory words about the approach we followed. First of all, about Vulnera, maybe just to say that Vulnera was conceived as a research and dissemination platform for the topic of vulnerability in digital technologies, starting from data protection. This is my background. And this is maybe revealing also the intersectorial and interdisciplinary approach of this work, because my background comes mostly from data protection and the digital market regulation, while Carlotta has
more criminal law and gender studies background.
So we felt the need to combine this different expertise to address the topic of the metaverse, because here, as we will rapidly show, the metaverse, of course, poses risks that go in the area of criminal law, in particular for sexual violence. But of course, it's a private platform where rules of digital market regulation apply. So that's why we thought that this frictions and tensions between different fields of law and regulation and different interests and fundamental rights should have been emphasized in our approach. So going back to the cooperation between Vulnera and AUDRi and Equality Now, this is the second work, the second report connected to, of course, the first one that we produced. We are mostly, why are we focusing on the metaverse in general and the risks of the metaverse? I think the first and most urgent pressure for this and urgency for this research was about the unprecedented challenge that the metaverse is posing for exploitation of vulnerability of individuals and of users. The initial challenge that we saw with social media about power imbalance between individuals and powerful apps where dependency is not only based on the individual addiction to a platform, but also to a socioeconomic dependency for the network effect and the concentration in the market of these platforms is really amplified in the metaverse, where the embodiment or the virtual embodiment of humans is exposing not just our mental dependency and addictions, but also our in particular, our physical experience transposed into the metaverse. So in the first, we just acknowledged mostly the research, the metaverse challenges, and in terms of vulnerability. So how to operationalize the concept of vulnerability in the metaverse. And in the second report, in this report, we are mostly focusing on sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse as one of the most urgent challenges as a case study of the vulnerability theoretical discussion we had last year. I wanted to acknowledge that most of the work comes from Carlotta and her expertise on the topic, and I was mostly providing some background support for the, as I said before, for the more commercial regulatory part of the metaverse. So today we are rapidly going to address the need for discussing the metaverse, but this has been already absorbed by my introduction and a rapid description of the metaverse, just to be on the same page with everyone. We see that we have already 50 people connected, so we might need some alignment. And then description, I would leave to Carlotta to address the sexual violence and harassment description, and also the definition and possible responses. So just to mention the biggest challenges for discussing the metaverse, I already emphasized that the metaverse is, of course, an added challenge in terms of embodiment, but it's also more because it's a social construct that is human-made. So it's embodiment through human lenses. So there is this double challenge in terms of regulating something that has already some non-neutral values embedded in the system. So the first time the word metaverse appeared was 32 years ago in this famous novel Snow Crash. And then it became more popular in the very last years, also thanks to or due to Zuckerberg and Meta name. But now what we mean by metaverse, it's more or less something that maybe is not yet there. In this slide, we showed how for some of what is the level of expectation and need in terms of time development of some of the most advanced technologies enhancing human body. So from brain-computer interaction to augmented reality, virtual reality, etc. We see that we are after maybe the peak of expectations now, and we are going maybe towards the plateau of productivity as smartphones now. But we will see. The market is really controversial because after an initial enthusiasm of Meta, there was a stop of investments. But now Apple is also commercializing an augmented reality visor. So things are developing super fast. And not just the private sector has invested, but also the public sector has shown interest, in particular in some countries, to invest in the metaverse. COVID-19 was one of the challenges for putting everything on a virtual reality, but we will see. And of course, we can, when we refer to metaverse, there are different nuances to understand. A virtual reality is different from augmented reality. Maybe just to simplify, augmented reality is the capability to just see what is happening around us with some additional features and aspects. So just to mention, if you have some Google glasses, now they are not used anymore, but just an easy example for everyone, that is a form of augmented reality, which is different from virtual reality. Virtual reality is more similar to a game, to Second Life. Just maybe if someone used to play at Second Life some years ago, or similar virtual reality scenarios. And of course, it's based on immersive 3D, and it's interoperable. It should be. This is the idea. At the moment, it's not really interoperable, but the idea that Meta had at the beginning was of a space where every web page could be a room of this big metaverse, or and so, you know, and also synchronous, etc. Of course, this is blurring the distinction between what is material and what is not. And also something very important going towards the topic of violence and harassment is that there is a big difference between social media and the metaverse in terms of user interaction. For user interplay, for user interaction with the platform, in the metaverse, we need an avatar. And an avatar has with itself the whole construction of stereotypes or images or social constructs that an avatar can have. And this brings to all the positive and negative aspects of avatars, including, for example, discrimination, stigmatization, etc. So I already mentioned this. And so just now I will pass into Carlotta about this challenge of how the avatar and the augmented risk that we have in the augmented or virtual reality can play a role.
Exactly, like as Gianclaudio was mentioning in our past report on meta vulnerability, one of our conclusions was that avatar creation could lead to discrimination and sexual violence due to gender and other personal characteristics. And as Amanda said in her introduction, when you open the newspaper, or perhaps just you Google it, you realize that there has been an increasing amount of personal experiences of sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse, in these virtual environments. And perhaps some of you in last January have heard about the British police investigation after the report of, let's say, a gang rape of an underage girl that was wearing a virtual reality headset and was joining one of these virtual game. But actually, for women like avatars and female users, instances of sexual violence and harassment within virtual realms are not unfamiliar, are not new. And actually, the same concept of virtual rape was coined in 1993, actually when I was born, is as old as me, in this virtual world called Lambda Mu, where a user used text-based program to coerce other avatars into describing explicit sexual conducts and engaging in them. And although the experience of these, let's say, act avatars was considered harmful, it was not possible to bring charges because any criminal offenses could be satisfied. Like, for instance, there was no physical penetration. And something similar actually happened a couple of years later in 2007, when again, the Belgian Federal Police initiated a criminal investigation into another virtual rape incidents on the Second Life platform, the one Gianclaudio mentioned before, where again, an avatar simulated non-consensual sex by taking control over another. So you will be surprised just by Googling how many experiences have been increasingly reported. But one of the main questions when saying, oh, I'm actually working on sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse is, okay, but what do you mean with that? And actually, when you look at the news over the internet, there is no description of what these, let's say, these sexual misconducts actually involved in detail. So let's say that in general, the experiences and the reports use terms that echo familiar themes seen in physical war incidents. And so, like, for instance, it's a matter, as Amanda said, of non-consensual touching, groping, and also, for instance, like we see the non-consensual taking and creating of materials, something that in cyberspace we call image-based sexual abuse. But sometimes when going through these pieces of news, we actually realize that there are new instances of sexualized and gendered harms. So, for instance, there are reports that refer to a so-called shadow princess abuse, where the offender, although being blocked, remains in the surrounding area of the victim that can perceive this, let's say, ghost-like presence. Mm-hmm. And so the victim reports an experience that is similar to the, let's say, to the idea, to the sensations of being followed, stared at, subjected to unwanted attention, like, let's say, in stalking in the offline environments. Or another example of like new abuse is the potential for avatar hacking, where another individual steals someone else's identity or gain control over the avatar. And sometimes gaining control is not only a matter of the of the virtual environment, but also of the haptic devices. But from here.
Sorry.
But what about the response of the victim? Because like from here onwards, you're gonna see that there are a lot of similarities between the meta, the virtual environments and the offline ones. Because actually, it seems that the victim response is closely mirrors offline reactions, often including, for instance, instances of freezings. And at the same time, victims report experiencing similar physical, psychological, and social harms as those seen offline or in cyberspace. So like on the slide, you see examples of anxiety, panic attacks, depression, humiliation, but also perhaps a sense of social violation and distrust. And the reason behind these similarities are several. So, for instance, some research already shows that when people customize their avatars, because of this customization, there is a development of strong psychological bonds, meaning that the impact of the abuse persists beyond the virtual experience. But at the same time, we should also consider that the metaverse is trying to use multisensory, hyper-developed technologies that try to aim at reproducing multisensory experiences. So although the physical body is not there, is perhaps absent, we could say, the mind is still deceived to perceive a presence, and so feeling this kind of humiliation or harm. And last but not least, we should also consider, but we will also get back to it in a minute, that this harm is primarily gender-based. So it means that when the victim is a woman, this new form of violence, of harassment can evoke the fear and trauma that women endure daily due to their common, let's say, subordination and oppression within society. And this was the harm at the individual level. But we should not forget that there is actually a broader impact at the society level. And here, although like evidence, of course, is still lacking, we can foresee, let's say, a negative response similar to what's sometimes happening in cyberspace, meaning that victims are expected to withdraw, to self-censor, meaning that the metaverse is at risk of being less and less diverse. And therefore, like impacting not only diversity, but also perhaps like democracy and other fundamental values. And at the same time, we sometimes forget that like violence also has a negative impact on the economic dimension, both for the victim and the state. And this is also something that might happen in this case. But let's move a bit forward, like to see how to define sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse, how to categorize them, because we are lawyers and we love categories. So actually, for this purpose, we can take a step back. In 2018, when the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls, its Causes and Consequences, stood out as the first voice in offering a comprehensive definition of online and technology-facilitated violence against women. So the rapporteur defined it, and here I'm quoting, as any form of gender-based violence against women that is committed, assisted, or exacerbated, either partially or entirely, through the use of information and communication technologies, such as mobiles, phones, smartphones, the internet, social media platforms, or email. And after 2018, online and technology-facilitated violence has caught the attention of other international mechanisms, but also policymakers, civil-based society organizations, and so forth, that expand this definition, including other technologies that were able to channel new forms of gender-based violence, like artificial intelligence. But some of them already recognize the metaverse as something that could be a new means of like oppression and abuse. And because of this link between online technology-facilitated violence and the one specifically perpetrated in the metaverse, we can identify three, let's say, main characteristics of this form of abuse. So I think, as repeatedly said, sex violence and harassment in the metaverse is gender-based, in a sense that it's the main targets are women because of their gender, but more generally because it disproportionately affects them. So it means that sexual violence and harassment in the metaverse is far from being a novelty, is actually deeply rooted in gender stereotypes and systematic violence against women. At the same time, sexual violence harassment in the metaverse is not an isolated phenomenon. It's actually part of this continuum of multiple interrelated and recurring forms of violence against women that now permeate across online and offline worlds. And I'm pretty sure that most of you are familiar with this theory that was developed back in the 80s, of course, with no reference to the online dimension, but still relevant today, by Liz Kellis. And last but not least, we should also recognize that this form of violence is intersectional. And again, like intersectionality is a theory that was developed in the late 80s by Kimberly Crenshaw, but this means that victims, or like more generally like women in the metaverse, will be impacted in varying degrees and to different extents, depending on their specific characteristics and how these characteristics intersects with different axes of subordination and oppression. So, having said that, I think that the main question now is, in the remaining time, how to respond to this new abuse. And when trying to answer this question, when doing the research, we say, okay, let's look at what meta developers are doing. So what are the companies are doing? And let's say we saw three main approaches. First, there was the introduction of these, let's say, safe zones. So protective shields that allowed users to activate a bubble when feeling threatened or harmed. And so within this zone, users are supposed to be protected from any form of unwanted interactions. And in theory, users should be trained before joining and should receive constant reminders of these, let's say, of this option, mitigation measure. Another solution instead is to, let's say, code some defensive gestures, meaning that you can push potential offenders away. But actually, more often, meta providers, developers rely on their term and conditions, where they, let's say, draw a line between permissible and impermissible conduct. And if something happens, the user can then report or follow, let's say, a more procedural path. But actually, all these solutions fall short, for different reasons. The first one is that they are primarily victim blamings, but also, let's say, narrow-minded, myopic. And that's because, I mean, if you implement these safe zones, is more or less like you are asking a person to confine themselves. So in the offline world, it's like you are asking someone to stay at home instead of going on the street because perhaps this person fear of being catcalled. And at the same, and then, let's say, a similar problem comes with these defensive gestures, because it's like telling women offline that they should train themselves and attend self-defense courses rather than understanding that the root causes are others, and those are the ones that should be addressed. And as we said before, one of the let's say social harm that we see is this risk of withdrawal. And this is because let's say that the metaverse operates as a contractual relationship between the user and the developer. So if the user is violated, is harassed, the only thing that could do perhaps is just to left with no choice, but with no other choice. And last but not least, linked to the terms and condition, of course, one of the solutions is related to content moderation, but we have already seen on social platforms and other, let's say, environments that content moderation could be a solution, but at the same time introduces new challenges. But we will get back to it at the end of the presentation. So this more or less was the solution that we examined with regard to the meta providers and developers. But what about the state? So, well, perhaps unsurprisingly, the law is still lagging behind schedule, so we don't have law addressing this problem. So the first solution we thought of was, okay, let's look at sexual offenses that are already there and are regulating offline violence. But in the few literature that is already there is this prevailing belief that current legal frameworks are not adequate because there is too much emphasis on the physical interaction that in the metaverse doesn't exist in the same way. At the same time, though, one should or could argue that the haptic devices can simulate this physical interaction. So perhaps with a bit of creativity, one could try to follow this path. Second possibility we thought of was like, okay, like we don't have like, let's say, meta crimes, but we have cyber crimes. But again, we saw how these laws are failing us, mostly because even more than the sexual offenses related to the offline world, this law primarily targets human interaction that are just transposed in cyberspace. So perhaps this chance is even more complex. So the last option we saw was like, okay, perhaps we should only start advocating for legal reforms. But of course, it's not easy and it's not quick, but we never know. As we said, there are already some international organizations that are advocating for this. And briefly, because we'd like to also have some time for Q&As, the last topic, the possible collaboration between the state and the private sector. And this is also because we are both based in Europe. We mostly work on the EU legal framework. And so we see this recent legislative trend imposing obligation on social media platforms. So like, for instance, a couple of months ago, the DSA, the Digital Service Act, became applicable, but also in the UK, we saw the adoption of the Online Safety Act. So are these framework relevant, or at least can provide some food for thought? And yeah, perhaps they might. And more precisely, let's say we identified like 3 main points amongst others. The first one is the performance of impact assessments. Perhaps Gianclaudio can then add a couple of words, but impact assessments have been, let's say, like a policy trend since I think the introduction of the GDP, the General Data Protection Regulation. But perhaps what these impact assessments still fail to do is to incorporate women's rights and gender-sensitive perspective. So perhaps the performance of like an effective women's rights impact assessment could help to mitigate the current episodes of gendered and sexualized harms we encounter. Then we said, as we mentioned before, content moderation is something that is already there and has already been used. So it involves the regulation of user-generated content online. We actually already see that content moderation actually can perpetuate gender and other diversity biases and could continue to fail to address root causes of violence against women. But again, it's always a matter of how like you use these tools. So perhaps it could be another way to explore. And last but not least, women's rights by design, again, is like, perhaps you can add a couple of extra words. But in the past year, we've already in the field of data protection, we have seen that design can play a key role in shaping human behavior and reinforcing social norms. So through this design approach, we could perhaps counter these these diversity biases and safeguard women's rights in the metaverse, including the engagement with like victims and other stakeholders that could ensure the, let's say, the effective consideration of specific needs. And I think we have been on time, and we still have times for some questions. I don't know if you'd like to.
No, maybe just a couple of provocation to open then the question or the interaction. I see that we have maybe already one. I know it was a message from Amanda. Just to say, just to comment on this, as you see, the challenge and the tensions here are extremely difficult. For example, going back to the solutions, Carlotta mentioned that maybe a specific new crime, specific for the specificity of the situation, because it's not a purely cyber situation, so it's not a purely cyber crime situation, but at the same time, it's not a physical violence crime. So it's one of a kind. It's a new form. But indeed, new crimes can bring to a problem of tech neutrality that are not, forward-looking, because technology might change to circumvent the law, or the fact that states should approve it. So that's why we went with this final slide, which is more, how to say, business solutions. And we are aware that business solutions are not always super impactful, because if business should rely on if we should rely on self-assessment of businesses to limit themselves, to moderate their content, to assess the impact before that the solutions are put into the market, or to work on the design, of course, often we can be disappointed. But maybe just to mention some lights of hope, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, the DSA, no, 3 days ago was Sunday. So on Monday, the DSA enforcement at the DG Connect of the European Commission started their first important enforcement of against TikTok. TikTok is not a Metaverse provider, but it's subject to the DSA, to the Digital Services Act, and for a poor impact assessment. So basically, the DSA, as Carlotta was suggesting, has already a duty to do a risk assessment for fundamental rights, so a fundamental right impact assessment, that Article 34. But all the cynical commentators were saying, this impact assessment don't really work, and it's impossible to make them work, because indeed, it's really hard to enforce them. And the regulators don't care, because it's based on self-assessment. Well, good news is that for the first time, in just the very first weeks or months of application of the DSA, the European Commission already started a sanction procedure against TikTok for not implementing a good impact assessment. So for not taking proactive actions. But then, as Carlotta was saying, the impact assessments might be limited for the scope, because they refer to fundamental rights in general. They don't refer to specific groups. But for example, the AI Act has and the Metaverse might be, most of the Metaverse application can be under the AI Act. High risk or limited risk, because there might be emotional recognition, biometric recognition, but there are also possible interaction with vulnerability, etc. And in the impact assessment of the AI Act, there's a reference to special groups. It's still a vague reference, but groups that might be highly impacted. So maybe victims of gender-based violence might be one of those groups. And just to say that on this topic, we just launched a project here in Leiden with other universities and institutions, in which we are proposing to. It's called Resocial, and we'll focus on this. And maybe very final word is that there is a new directive on business due diligence that refers not to fundamental rights impact assessment, but to UN conventions and UN treaties. So maybe there's a place for further research where we could check whether the women's right impact assessment might be possible. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlotta and Gianclaudio, for that presentation. I know there's a lot more to say, and I know there are also a lot more solutions that you'd want to propose. But there's 2 questions here that I would want to pose to you around how maybe some of the violence in the metaverse towards women, especially sexual violence, is possibly coming from the history of gaming, and particularly the military use and violence against women, and war and quote unquote horror entertainment in VR experiences. So a question would be, how does your work address the issues of gameplay and the role of potential assaults in that narrative?
Well, I think it's a really pertinent question, not only because of the similarity we see when, let's say, reading experiences of sexual violence in the metaverse and the one in these other virtual environments. But because, as I mentioned, the metaverse is something still new. Perhaps we don't even have a metaverse yet the way we imagine it. So this also means that when you do this forward-looking research, there are not a lot of evidence. So what you do is to try to work by analogy. And the gaming research, the gaming word is for sure the most inspirational source. And so, for instance, I was recently talking to a professor from the sociology faculty of the Universidad Complutense de Madrid, and she is working on the manosphere in games, in virtual games, in gaming. And it was extremely interesting how these two realms were like overlapping. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I think here's another question. You did touch on it, but can this harassment come under cyber laws, as there is no personal touch? And I think it also goes into another question, which talks about the possibilities of programming so that the metaverse would not allow virtual rape. So maybe just to clarify a little bit on those two questions, because there is no physical, I don't want to say there's no physical harm or there's no physical touch, would cyber laws or ICT laws or any of the existing laws be able to protect? And is there any way that we could ensure that from a programming or a design level, it is not actually even possible to sexually violate someone in the metaverse?
So I think, let's say this like double question actually requires like 3 levels of answers. So, and please jump in if you feel. So with regard to the use of cyber law, it also depends what we mean with cyber law, in the sense that if we mean criminal law in cyberspace, yes, this idea that there is no physical touch could be one reason why it's not applicable. But as I said, it's not primarily that, it's more that the way these laws are currently phrased in, let's say, most of the European laws I've looked at are really linked to the individual itself. So there is no way of, let's say, arguing with reference to the avatar and what's happening in cyberspace with these like haptic devices and so forth. So it's also a matter of how the law has been phrased. But if we think about cyber laws, are laws that regulate interaction in cyberspace from, let's say, a non-criminal law procedure, criminal law perspective. So perhaps, for instance, data protection law or Digital Service Act, as we said. I think this lack of physical touch is not relevant, and perhaps there is some room for creativity. But perhaps then you can add something else. And the other question, I forgot.
The other question around how to ensure at coding level or at design level it is virtually impossible to harm.
Sorry. So yeah, that was actually, it's actually like one of the most immediate reaction that some providers had. Like, for instance, I remember that I read about this having like avatars without, for instance, genital areas or perhaps non-humans. But for me, that's not a way to eradicate the root causes of violence, like gender-based violence against women. Again, it's more like a way to perhaps avoid the problem, and then with technology, you never know. There is always perhaps a room for hacking or for technological misuse.
Yeah. No, I mean, I wanted to just add to this, but I mean, I fully agree with Carlotta. Just maybe an anecdote on when 2 years ago, I was in Istanbul. We were presenting, Meta was presenting the first Oculus tool. And I remember the payoff sentence was a sense of presence. And I think this is indeed the tension that we see here. The more the technological advancement goes toward presence, the more there's a risk that the cyber crime becomes a physical crime. I mean, there is a spectrum, right? And now we are in this gray zone between the cyber crime and let's say the physical one. But the solution of limiting and avoiding any form of distance limitation, like creating a distance between avatars to avoid this kind of physical attacks or virtually physical attacks, is goes back. I think it's so interesting in terms of regulation of technology. The first philosophers of technology were talking about technology as affordances, right? So a fork has some affordances. The fork afford me to eat. The way that the metaverse can limit the affordances of an individual, creating distance, is of course one of the first way of regulation by design, right? You design that the crime cannot happen, but there might be, of course, other forms of consequences. Even if you create this distance, I'm just now brainstorming with you because this is a new era. We have to be a bit cyberpunk minded to discuss this. But what if a person, an avatar, is constantly trying to violate the distance? Isn't it also that one sense of invasion of the personal space? And also, as Carlotta was mentioning, there's much more. There's stalking. For stalking, you don't need distance. You don't need the proximity. You can have stalking with the But I liked to reflect on these provocations because they might be a source for future legislation on the point.
Thank you so much. Speaking of physical touch, there have actually been quite a number of comments in the Q&A around how physical touch, in quotations, physical touch is actually now possible, and it's being trialed in a number of VR-related in industries, particularly in the sex industry. So it seems it is, I think, over time, the physical touch question won't necessarily be a factor because they will, quote unquote, be physical touch. But in the interest of time, maybe just one more question to you. I was just wondering about the jurisdictional issues. So let's say we do have human rights by design. The EU has very progressive and protective laws. The US, Kenya, Nigeria, India, individual countries have amazing laws that would protect the citizens in those countries. What about thinking about it from a more multi-jurisdictional perspective? Does it help for the EU to have the DSA, or do we maybe need something that crosses borders? If you could please talk to that a little bit. Thank you.
It depends the level of utopia and idealism we want to embrace, in the sense that I think jurisdiction has been a legal problem since the launch of cyberspace, because states should have started realizing that geographical borders were, let's say, less relevant than ever. So, of course, like the Digital Service Act and in general, any effort at the EU, but in general at the regional and international level is what we should aim at. Of course, like to the extent that when you look at the literature, of course, there are scholars that claim for universal jurisdiction, like a jurisdiction that knows no border. But of course, in my opinion, I don't think that we will ever reach that level. Perhaps let's say the best solution, rather than looking at the European Union, we could look at the Council of Europe, that a couple of years ago adopted an international convention, so that goes beyond European countries. It also includes like Canada, Israel, Australia, United States, and it tries to harmonize cyber crimes. So this is the let's say the best solution at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have much to add on that, but maybe Amanda, can I, because I'm reading a question that I think is super interesting, the last one. So if I can pick that one, sorry to jump in your role.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, there's this question about whether the metaverse allow users to block other users, right? And it depends, of course, on the and the ability to see them or to see us, right? And this is something that it's super interesting because it was already part of the initial discussion. It depends on the platform, on how it is built, but I think that most of them, and in particular the metaverse, let's say sample, let's say pilot, has already this possibility. So basically, you can delete yourself from other people and other people from yourself, even in the same room, which means that actually we are in the same space and we don't see each other. So we experience the same space without perceiving the other person. So more than a sense of presence, this is a sense of magic I was commenting, because of course it's kind of a parallel world where we can decide who is there. So there is also potential and opportunity, right? Because we have more autonomy in determining our exposure to an environment with or without people, of course. And I think a similar approach exists for dating apps, where actually in dating apps you can delete yourself from other and others from you, but you can also decide, for at least in some proposal I was reading about metaverse, you can also decide that you don't appear to the other, but you can still see the other. So something like asymmetric. But I mean, I think it's all to be, yeah.
Thank you so much. We have a very buzzing Q&A, I must say, but we are left with only 4 minutes. But I would like to invite everyone to engage with ourselves from Equality Now, with Carlotta and Gianclaudio from Vulnera, and Emma Gibson from AUDRi. An email, you would have received an email address which you can get in contact with us. We'll be sharing the report, and you can share any other information that you have, or just feel free to engage with us. But yes, thank you so much. So I'll pass on to Emma Gibson, who's the Global Coordinator for the Alliance for Universal Digital Rights, AUDRi, just to give us closing remarks and thank you.
Yes, it just falls to me to say thank you so much to Carlotta and Gianclaudio from Leiden University, to Amanda from Equality Now, and thank you for that fascinating talk about the metaverse, and also for the really insightful and interesting questions that you all asked. And let's keep talking about this. And AUDRi, we invite you all to join AUDRi as supporters, either as an individual or an organisation. Just type in audri.org, and you can join in the chat about this as the cyber universe develops. So thank you so much, everybody, and I will see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.